and welcome back to Being Bethany. Before we get started, please like, comment and subscribe to this video. That would be very, very kind. And we're doing something a bit different today, guys. I am launching today my self-help book series. This is episode 1. So what am I talking about, I guess? Well, when I was struggling with my mental health, when in particular I had depression, I really struggled to read. Now before this, I loved reading. Behind me is a bookcase full of books, overflowing with books. Not all of them that I've read. I've even got some down by me on the floor right next to me. I loved reading. I absolutely did. But when I was depressed and when I was really struggling, I couldn't concentrate and I didn't find much enjoyment in it anymore. Because I couldn't concentrate, I would read a page and none of it would have gone in. And actually, it was when I was reading this book, which I'll tell you about in a minute, this was kind of the inspiration, because it noted in this book how when you're depressed, you struggle to read. And I guess it was just a little bit of like a wake-up call of perhaps I wasn't quite right. I mean, I think I knew, but it was just another thing to kind of go, you're poorly right now, and that's okay. So I thought what I could do, I'm not sure if it's going to work, but I could show you books that have helped me. Some, I got out like all my self-help books, because there's a lot, and some I've read, some I haven't. So I just thought maybe to bring you like some useful bits from them in video form if you can't read right now, and then also if you can, like suggestions. Now obviously what I like you might not like. I just thought if I brought you helpful bits in video form, then perhaps that might be better for you, especially if you're struggling right now and you can't concentrate on reading it. Let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start this self-help book series off with a book called Depressive Illness, The Curse of the Strong by Dr Tim Cantopher, I think is how you pronounce it. This is my copy here. Now, why is this the inspiration behind this? Well, when I was struggling with my depression, when I went to the doctors, when we were discussing different treatments and whether I want to go on medication, she said, look, there's no rush, take your time, think about it. Also, there's a book which you might find helpful, and she wrote the name down for me, and my older sister, when we went home, she purchased it for me. And now, why this book is important, I think, is one, because in the introduction, like I said, it said if you're in the middle of a depressive kind of episode, you won't be able to concentrate for very long, and that's okay. So he was like, read chapter 1 and chapter 5 when you can, because they're the most, I guess, relevant ones and important ones to you when you're suffering. I mean, the book itself is what? 114 pages. So I got, I guess, prescribed almost this book by my doctor. So what I'll do first is, he said to focus on chapters 1 and 5. So I'm going to talk about those two first, because they seem to be the most prevalent if you're struggling right now. So, before we get started, it does mean I will probably be looking at the book and at my notes on the book up and down. Can't really control that, so apologies if you find it annoying or anything. Also, he mentions that this book, he focuses mostly on stress-induced depressive illness. So he says that some of what he might say might not apply to, say, seasonal affective disorder or bipolar or manic depression. So yeah, some of it will relate, but mostly this book focuses on stress-induced depressive illness. But he says obviously if you're struggling with something else, please read it as well, because it might be helpful. It just might not be the whole explanation or advice to give to you if you're suffering from something else. So chapter 1 talks about what is depressive illness, and he reiterates in this chapter that it is a physical illness, just like pneumonia or something like that. I think people forget that because obviously a lot of stuff happens within the brain, and yes, it is a mental illness, that there are still physical symptoms and explanations to it. So he talks in particular to the limbic system. Now the limbic system can be found in the brain, and it controls lots of different things. It can control your sleeping and waking cycle, your temperature control, your temper control, eating patterns, and hormones. He says every hormone in the body is directly or indirectly under the control of the limbic system, and it keeps all functions in balance. And its most important function is to control mood. So he talks about the limbic system. He compares it to a reverberating circuit. He says when it's overloaded through stress, it can break. It can stop working. It can be overloaded, almost like how a fuse can blow. That's kind of the comparison that he makes. Now, he explains this so much better than how I'm explaining it. I just want to give you a brief explanation, but he really goes into detail how that system works. But what happens is the synapse, a part in your brain, breaks. And he says there are millions of these in the limbic system, and they are the most vulnerable part of the circuit. He says a nerve fibre is essentially a cable. Once a nerve impulse starts down a nerve fibre, it reaches the end without difficulty. The tricky bit is getting the impulse across the synapse. This is done by the first nerve releasing chemicals. And what happens is when you're overloaded and when it breaks, that the transmitter chemicals are affected to keep the circuit going, to keep it going round. And so stress can make them plummet. And he talks about the transmitter chemicals that are thought to be involved, because, you know, it's hard to study the brain and it's not all completely confirmed, but they believe are serotonin and noradrenaline and other chemicals such as dopamine. And he says the truth is we don't know for certain how these chemicals and nerve systems work, but nonetheless it's still clear that chemical changes in the limbic system are important in development of depression. So I just thought that was, I guess, quite helpful to show that, especially when it comes to stress-induced depression, that it's like a fuse is blown. Because I think sometimes people don't really believe it, and I think this book is actually probably quite helpful for people who want to help people that they know with depression to also understand. So I thought that was quite good. He obviously talks also about the symptoms of clinical depression, and he kind of talks about it. If I've talked about it in a previous video on what is depression, but it's a loss of lots of things. So a loss of sleep, although it can be more sleep, and a loss of appetite can be more appetite. A loss of energy, enthusiasm, concentration, memory, sex drive, self-esteem, feelings, hope, lots of different things can be symptoms of clinical depression, which are a loss of. And then he also talks about something which really resonated with me, which was, we're all different, yes, and anyone can get depression due to lots of different factors in their life. But especially for stress-induced depression, he talks about the type of person that's most likely to be affected by it. So I guess I just want to read out a little bit to you. He says, one more important fact. Depressive illness, or at least the commonest form, which is that caused by stress, nearly always happens to one type of person. He talks about it being his little party piece in interviews with his patients because he can kind of guess what they're like. So he said that he or she will have the following personality characteristics: moral strength, reliability, diligence, strong conscience, strong sense of responsibility, a tendency to focus on the needs of others before one's own, sensitivity, vulnerability to criticism, and self-esteem dependent on the evaluation of others. He talks about it being the person that you would usually turn to because you depend on them. You trust them. They're good at kind of helping you and giving you advice. But what can happen is that, he says, people are usually very surprised when they get ill. Indeed, they are the last person you would expect to have a breakdown. He says, but it isn't so surprising when you consider that depressive illness is a physical condition. So think about it. A strong person will react to these pressures by trying to overcome them. After all, they have overcome every challenge they have faced in the past through diligence and effort. So they keep going, absorbing more and more until symptoms appear. At this point, some people would say, hang on, I'm doing too much, this is ridiculous, like I need to stop. So they pull back before it's too late to go down that hole. But the sensitive person, without a very solid sense of self-esteem, can't stop struggling because they fear other people being disappointed in them. Even more than this, they fear being disappointed in themselves, so they keep going, they keep going, they keep going until suddenly, bang, the fuse has blown. And he says that's what it is, a blown fuse. He said it again, this isn't a metaphor, the limbic system is a type of fuse mechanism, and when it blows, it doesn't matter how hard you try, you can't achieve anything. Once the fuse is blown, you can put 1000 amps through it, but it won't do any good. So turn the electricity off. So that's in the first chapter. And I just thought that was quite good. I know when I read it, it kind of just made sense to me, you know? And I hope that it kind of makes sense to you. I don't know, is this helpful or not? I don't know, but I just think if you can't read it, then maybe someone else reading out to you. Obviously, you can use like, I don't know, Audible and things like that. But sometimes even that can be a bit overwhelming because it's like the whole book. So that was chapter 1. So now we move to chapter 5, because like I said, he says that if you can't read much right now, do chapters 1 and chapters 5. And I think that's because he wants you to understand how depression works here and how it is a physical illness because something has blown in your brain. And then chapter 5 talks about what to do when you get ill. Now, there's lots of chunks in here which I think are really good, so I'm just going to read some out to you. So he says, whatever your background and whichever route or routes you have taken into clinical depression, I invite you to consider the following. You have done too much, been too strong, and tried too hard for too long. Now the fuse is blown. It isn't your fault. Far from it. You are worthy of praise and admiration, not the self-criticism that you've been heaping on your own head for some time. I wanted to read that out to get right directly to you to say, stop giving yourself a hard time. You're not very well, and that's okay. So he suggests to rest. But what he suggests is, 1, that your body needs to heal. You need to kind of just take a step back. Take a step back from all the demands of your life right now. Taking time off work, if this is possible. Getting help at home with chores or children, if you have children. Cancelling social events that you've been dreading. He says, above all, ignore those who tell you to get more active and to pull yourself together. Unless you want to be rude to them, and then that would be fine. Which I agree with that. I think that's what's quite good about this book, is he's not like wishy-washy. You can tell he really cares about people with depression, but in a way that's like a bit sarcastic to others, which I think is quite nice because, well, not to be sarcastic to others, but it's like he's standing up for you, and I think that style of writing sometimes can be quite good. It can make you chuckle a little bit as well, but you know that he cares. So yes, he talks about resting, but he does understand the trouble with that is that if you rest and you don't have much going on, then your mind can keep going over things. And he said that's the balance. He said you have to find something to do which will allow you to rest, but allow your brain to just kind of be idle. So he suggests maybe like watching some Australian soaps, maybe a bit of Home and Away, or any TV that you can, or if you can't do TV, maybe if it's like colouring, I found quite helpful actually, because I didn't really have to think about it too much apart from what colours I wanted to use. So anything that can kind of keep that's not too active, that can keep your brain from punishing you, because it's going to want to like make you feel guilty for the fact that you're resting and you shouldn't. He says also to not make any rash decisions or major life changes during this time, and he says, and don't harm yourself. I know it seems hopeless now, but it will all look very different in a little while when you get better. And yes, you will get better. People recover. Don't punish yourself. Feelings of guilt are a symptom of your illness. I know that was something majorly for me. Yes, your illness may have affected your family, but it isn't your fault any more than if you had developed pneumonia. If you were lying in bed, wheezing and puffing with a severe chest infection, you wouldn't be berating yourself, would you? You also wouldn't be urging yourself to get on and pull yourself together. This is a much worse illness while it lasts than double pneumonia, and is every bit as physical. So get off your case and let yourself be. Which I just love, because it's kind of like tough love, but you know he actually cares about you. I guess, you know, when you have that person who comes across as all tough, but deep down, you know that they really care about you. And then they talk about medication, and he has a really good section on that, because he kind of puts like what people would normally say to him about medication. So things like, I prefer to do it on my own without resorting to pills. And he's like, why? Why would you say the same if you had pneumonia? Chest infections like clinical depression may recover without medication, but choosing not to take antibiotics is risky and means you'll remain ill for longer. So he's just saying, what are you trying to prove to people? If you want to take them and you feel like you need to take them, that's okay. So he has all these kind of statements, and he goes through and like things, are antidepressants addictive? I think my Siri just went off there. We're okay. And he talks through all of them, which I think is really good. And then he just talks about psychotherapy, and he's quite honest, and he says that unfortunately it's a bit of a shortage area in the NHS in terms of, we love the NHS, but unfortunately politicians aren't investing enough in the NHS, and people are stretched and they can only do what they can do. So unfortunately it might mean that it can get a bit expensive to do psychotherapy, but just the importance of that as well, and the different counsellings that you can get. So those are kind of the main two chapters. He talks a bit about depression from history, he talks a bit about the theories of depression, and he has a good chapter actually, what was it? Number 3, like what causes it and what like resonates with you. So he goes through different things. It could be that it's like anger turned inwards or resonance with past loss. And I think sometimes when people write things down to you and you feel like you can relate, that can be quite helpful in helping you figure out why maybe perhaps you've now got depressed, because eventually you're going to have to realise, so you can make changes to protect yourself. He has a chapter on recovery. He talks about psychotherapies and physical treatments, and he has a whole chapter about all the different types of antidepressants and what they're now called, like their trade name, their chemical name, which I think is quite interesting. And then he has some skills for problem areas, which I think are quite good. So he talks about, he gives you relaxation exercises, tips on how to sleep, and he talks about the effect of your sleep on depression. And then he has a little chapter at the end talking about actually politics and the press and how the media can have a big effect on your mental health, because they report on the bad things, you know, and they kind of like to give that outlook sometimes. And I think with coronavirus especially, I know that for some members of my family, it was better for them not to watch the news all the time, because it actually had a really big impact on their mental health. And to have a doctor talk about that as well, in a book that came out, I think 2003, I want to say? Yeah, I think around 2003. So quite relevant points to today. It's a short book. If you can't read it right now, hopefully some of the stuff I've given to you is helpful from the book. But I would also encourage, like I said, family and friends, it's only small, to read through it, to understand what someone else is going through. It's quite straightforward. It's not too technical. Yes, I was talking about the limbic system in the beginning, but the way he explains that really makes sense. I just like his style of writing. So that is my self-help book review. I wanted to start with this one, like I said, because it's the inspiration behind it, and it links well with my previous video on what is depression. But I'm going to be doing like ones on Matt Haig's Reasons to Stay Alive will be one. I'm going to do one on the bullet journal method, which I've been implementing, which is about organising your life. And I've got lots to read still, so there's going to be lots coming. If there's any that you have seen and thought that would be quite good and you can't read it right now because you're struggling with your mental health, pop it in the comment section and I'll try and read it for you and see if I can bring any good bits to it for you. But I love you guys. I hope you have a great week and I'll see you very soon. Bye! Small and quite small chapters, and I just think it gives... My phone is ringing. Yeah, I don't know what I'm saying anymore. Ugh.